Hey everyone, I'm Damian Holbrook, and I will be moderating today's CCA conversation on one of Netflix's beloved comedy series, Heartstopper. Heartstopper focuses on Charlie and rugby-loving Nick, who meet at secondary school and quickly discover that their unlikely friendship is blossoming into an unexpected romance. Charlie, Nick, and their circle of friends must navigate the ever-relatable journey of self-discovery and acceptance, supporting each other as they learn to find their most authentic selves. With me now is Joe Locke, who plays Charlie Spring, and Kit Connor, who plays Nick Nelson. Guys, hello, hello, hello.
Hi.
Hello,
It,
how are
I,
you?
I am great because I get to talk to you two, and this show, this show is just, I can't deal with how wonderful this show is. And you guys, I have to say, like on screen, it just feels like you guys knew how important this show could be to young viewers and older viewers. I'm not gonna lie, I got a lot out of this. Did you know going into this show that this was gonna touch so many hearts?
I think we were making something special, didn't we? I think we were aware that Heartstopper was very new and different than lots of things that have been on TV before. But I think one thing I didn't realize when we were making it until it came out was the effect on maybe the older viewer. I think I'd always seen our show as like marketed towards young teenagers, and then when the show came out and actually it really resonated with quite a lot of older queer people who didn't get to see Heartstopper when they were growing up. That I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that for me, I think there was a general kind of consensus when we were making it that it was a show that needed to be made, and that it was like a very important show. But I think there was also this fear in making a queer show in the sort of modern climate, even though it is improving, every day. There is this fear that only a certain amount of people are really going to want to watch it, and it's only really going to get a certain amount of traction. And I feel like we always felt that it was a show that needed to be seen by a lot of people, especially if we did it right. So that's been kind of one of the nicest things after it came out, is that the actual reception that it's had, because a lot of shows like Heartstopper don't get that kind of reception, and don't get seen by as many people.
And that's something I've been talking to a lot of people about this show is parents can watch it with their kids. Kids can watch it with their parents, which is the most important part. That it is actually this very rare safe space, especially for queer kids or questioning kids like that are looking for something to help them kind of pave that way to have that conversation with their parents. And this show, like, it never goes across the line. It never, it stays romantic. And as someone who didn't have a Heartstopper when I was growing up, watching it, I was waiting for the deep, heavy, dramatic moment that destroys everything or ruins, because that's what we were used to. And this stayed in that romantic space. And for you guys, well, first of all, were you aware of the graphic novels that it's based on? Like, how much of this show did you know going in?
I think my sister had the first volume on her bookshelf, so I'd always seen it, but I hadn't actually read any of it until I got my first email, basically, about the audition. And when I got that audition, they sent through a link to the web comics, and I read through probably the first volume, maybe a bit more, to get that kind of background. And then, as soon as I got the role, I just very easily read through everything else I could possibly read. But yeah, it's a pretty cool to be able to make something based on a graphic novel.
And Joe, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I quite similar to Kate. I had a friend who was obsessed with them and read all of them and was like, "Joe, you need to read this. Like, you are Charlie Spring." And then when they did an open call, and then when I did my first self tape, I read all of them in an evening, and then
And this is your, like, one of your first I mean, how was stepping into such a big role so early in your career?
I guess because when I got the part, I hadn't done any professional acting work. I'd always wanted to, but it's really hard to break into the industry. And so when it happened, it was amazing. But I also when we were making Heartstopper, we weren't aware at all how big it was going to be, and so that was sort of made it easier. But I guess I relate so much to Charlie and his journey and his experiences and the way that he looks at the world. So I probably put more of myself into Charlie than I would have looking back liked, but it meant that I was able to do it authentically, which I'm really proud of.
And Kit, you were basically the seasoned professional at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
By now.
somewhat. I think I was kind of like brought onto, it was a very like interesting thing for me because I was brought onto this set being kind of seen as the guy, one of the few people who had sort of worked before, and by that point I'd been in the industry for about 10 years, but it was still very much a new landscape for me, you know, firstly playing one of the leads and kind of having that responsibility to, you know, lead a show alongside Joe was something that, you know, I was terrifying. But I also think that almost within a week or two, that fact became very, very insignificant because everyone very quickly sort of got into it, and I felt very much like, you know, they were all just as experienced as I was, and yeah, I think it's really lovely to have that kind of fresh feel to it, that everyone really wants to be there, everyone's really excited. You know, the 12-hour days feel a lot less long. But yeah, I think very quickly everyone was really, you know, got into it. Joe was an immediate sort of natural pro, and yeah, that made life a lot easier.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, Joe, I gotta say, like, it wasn't until I looked at IMDb that I was like, wait, this kid has never done anything before. You guys were both so good, but this is a tough character because we meet Charlie after he's come out. We haven't even seen the struggle that he went through to get to where he is when we meet him. What kind of prep work did you do for that?
Well, I guess it's quite difficult for Charlie's story because, again, you said you don't know what's happened, and I mean, I had lots of long conversations with Alice, the writer, who is a genius, about what Charlie goes through, and I was about to say a spoiler for season 2, but I'm not going to because I get told off by everyone else in the chat. But like, I think for season 1 especially, Charlie's still quite broken from his bullying in the past, and what makes it harder is because we don't see that, you then need to try and portray that without showing it, and just the damage that's caused by that. And I read a lot of articles about queer experience growing up, and look back on my own queer experience growing up and my friends' queer experiences, and try to just be as authentic as possible, because I think that's what is so good about Heartstopper. Is, I'm stealing a Kit quote, but he says it's like seeing the world out of rose-tinted spectacles. But that's still, you see the world as a real world, and whilst keeping my version of that quote is that we deal with dark issues, but we always see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that is what makes Heartstopper so special, and Charlie as a character makes him so special as well.
And there is that optimism. There's always that optimism for all the characters. There's a lightness to everyone. Like, even when Tao is like heartbroken over the fact that his friend has been keeping the secret, you know he's going to forgive him. He even says, like, I'm going to stay angry for a little bit and then I'll be okay. And Nick, he's described early on as a golden retriever. Kit, did you take that as kind of like, okay, challenge accepted, and I'm going to make this character as lovable as possible and as playful as possible?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't quite aware of like that whole golden retriever thing. There's one line in episode 1 where it's very much mentioned, but you know, since it came out, that's really the only time I've quite realized the significance of you know, Nick Nelson and golden retriever, that connection. But I think that it's very, very clear in the way that Nick is written and the way that he's done in the comics and in the script for season 1, that he's very much a kind of, you know, the kind of odd one out in his friendship group, and that he's not the super laddie, super this, super that, and that he's very innocent. I always just saw him as a very innocent character who had very naturally found himself in this friendship group because he's, easy to talk to. He's, nice to people. He's good at sports, and so therefore he attracts the popular crowd. But that hasn't really had much of an effect on him, other than really just a sort of social insecurity. So I kind of use that as my main thing for the character. But I think also one of the nice things about, I think it's the same for Joe, but I'm not going to talk for him, is that it felt that approaching a lot of the scenes, especially between Nick and Charlie, we did them in a very natural way, like not overthinking it. We really just saw them as these two people are kind of falling in love, play it like that. And it felt like we just kind of quite quickly, naturally got into that headspace. And I think it feels like the scenes are a bit more just real than because of that, I think.
And I gotta tell, there are moments that are just so, they hit so close to the bone, where it's just like when he wants to hold his hand when he's asleep on the couch, like things like that, like the physical closeness that you guys establish on screen when you're sitting next to each other at the desk or whatever. You're just a little closer than normal friend, like usual friends would be. And I love that push and pull of, is this going to happen? How can this work? And for you, Kit, the search into, Nick's search and his quest, like he's not sure of everything. And he does, it's really interesting. He does actual research. And this is something that a lot of people are doing, because, bisexual visibility is not so represented on television. And this character landing in that spot, I loved that he was able to find that in himself, and that Charlie didn't bristle at that. Like, he accepted him.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two main points. I think the first thing about the whole research thing, it's something that most queer people can relate to. The idea of typing in "Am I gay?" and just asking Google all these unanswerable questions. I think is something that, even if it seems a little bit silly, like you kind of watch that scene where he types it in, and you kind of go, "That's kind of like, that's a funny question to ask Google," but everyone does it, and it is so relatable. And I think that the bisexual community is a community that has really a shockingly low amount of representation, especially male bisexual characters. And it is shocking, because a huge amount of the LGBTQIA plus community is made up of bisexual people. It's a huge community, but we really don't get much representation. So it was a real pleasure to be able to kind of portray that journey and those experiences. But yeah, I think that it's sort of like, it's just, I don't know, playing those kind of moments it felt like the sort of main arc of the character, if that makes sense, because it's not just so much as sort of, working out whether or not you are, a boy is attracted to another boy. It's also, discovering whether or not everything that he sort of previously thought about his sexuality is suddenly, invalid, or whether or not it's something that he wants to still acknowledge. And I think that's, something that isn't seen very often.
Right. And honestly, I don't blame him for, I mean, everyone should fall in love with Charlie, but also Tara is wonderful. Like, I could see, like, I would fall for Tara.
Yeah.
Joe, your character, you get to primarily work with a larger group in more fun ways. Like Kit, your friends, the scenes that Nick has with his friends, those friends suck. But Charlie's friends are awesome.
Yeah.
How was that getting to balance this like this story of Nick and Charlie, and then also Charlie's relationship with Elle and Tao and Isaac?
I mean, I think one of the most beautiful parts of Heartstopper is just showing like queer happiness and queer joy in more than just romance. In like the platonic friendship group that Charlie has is queer love in just a different form, and I think it's so beautiful for us to be able to show that, and whilst also showing this incredible love story between these two young boys. And so it's just great.
And Kit, did you feel almost like a sense of relief when you got to work with those characters? Because even though they weren't completely sold on Nick early on, at least they were fun.
Yeah, I mean, those scenes were certainly like the most fun that we really had. No offense, Joe, but the day when we were all all in at the same time was always really fun. And I think that also one of the most beautiful things about it is the fact that making the show, we were also able to kind of create this beautiful queer group of people, and people that we deeply love. So that was lovely.
And the great thing is the way the show presents so much of it. It's like you can even remove the queer part of it, and just it's a story about love. You know, and we see that in so many different ways. In fact, like just with the teacher being so generous and so understanding, and both of you have these incredible scenes with your parents that, I mean, first of all, getting to work with Olivia Colman, I mean, that's just beyond. And that scene where she thanks him for, telling her, how daunting was that going into, prepping for that scene?
I was terrified. I really was terrified. I think it was like, immediately when I read the script, that was the scene that jumped out, and that was the scene that I really wanted to get right. And I think that it just, without that scene, the character, the story wouldn't have really made sense for the character. And it felt like the right ending for the season. And yeah, we needed to do it right. And at first, I didn't know that it was going to be Olivia Colman. We found out very, very late. We found out maybe probably 2 months into shooting, I'd say. Like it was really quite late. So originally I was just kind of thinking, God, I don't really know who's going to be playing my mom, but I'm sure it's no one too crazy. So I was more worried about getting it right myself. When I found out that it was going to be Olivia Colman, I was like, okay, this is going to be absolutely awful. This is going to be terrifying. We got 2 days to shoot with Olivia. Had to cram all the scenes to shoot because she's, extraordinarily busy, very much in demand. But we spent those 2 days just cramming everything in. And one of the final scenes that we shot was that coming out scene, which it was a really unbelievable experience to be able to play that scene with Olivia. She's one of the most terrifyingly effortless actors I've ever seen. It's like she